see here. So, welcome everybody. For those who just joined us, I was telling Virginia and everybody that Monday or early next week, I'm going to send out a packet to everybody that will have all the recordings and all the supplemental materials that go along with everything, and you'll see that in your inbox. So, and then of course, any questions you have, I'll be more than happy to to address regarding the packet and also just anything going forward. And on that note, does anybody have any questions about anything we've covered in the last 2 days? No? Okay. So today, what I would like...
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Actually.
Go ahead, Lacey.
I was wondering if today we'd be able to hear from people who've done Poetry Inside Out and what they were thinking in terms of best practices during distance learning, of how to facilitate this best. I know it's different for every classroom, but I'm new to it. And so even just hearing what people are thinking would be really helpful, as it seems like it will have to be, modified while you're on the internet.
That. So just to clarify, then you mean sort of just like strategies, things like that, and stuff. Well, you know what? Let's kick off with that. We have here with us Susan Minix, who Lacey, I think you know, and Lisa Yao, both who are I would consider to be veteran teachers, people who have taught this, as well as Arzu, who's been working with me and her colleague Todd for a better part of 2 years now, doing some research on the project. So I think they're good people to ask questions of. So I'll open the floor up to Susan and Lisa, and then anybody who has questions for either of them, we can take it from there.
I have not done it digitally, so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
Hi, sweetie.
Yes, I'm Lisa. I see some familiar faces. That's great. I've been trying to get more teachers to come on board with Poetry Inside Out for years, but it's such a secret, like a special secret that certain people know about it. And I've been so happy to join it about 4 years ago. Currently, I'm teaching 4th grade, and last year was very challenging in the spring, where I really want to continue Poetry Inside Out with my students. Started Poetry Inside Out 2 or 3 poems already, so my student was familiar with it. So that obstacle was not in front of me, because they were familiar with Poetry Inside Out. But the other obstacle was, as all you guys know, was how to do this virtually. And a couple of teachers who had done Poetry Inside Out before had done some very nice innovation. They do video, Flipgrid, and using slide presentation where the student could interact. I'm from Philadelphia, so we use Google Classroom a lot. So teacher was using Google Slides and Google Doc to interactively work with students. It is going to be very overwhelming at first, because I don't see it happening with 25 students doing Poetry Inside Out the first day. So if you don't have to take this suggestion, but I would suggest to test it out a little bit with a couple of your students, so that you will become better at teaching it. This past spring, what I did is I uploaded the poem and the translation, and actually have students able to type in their translation using the glossary. So that was very interesting. And I'm trying to come up with other ways of doing it, like using Pear Deck or Flipgrid, some other ways, so that you get other responses from the students. My partner teacher, also a 4th grade teacher in my school, she's also participating in she also involved with Poetry Inside Out. So what we did at the end of the year was had like a celebration where my student and her student came together, and we did like a little presentation to each of the classroom and videotaped it. And it's a, how should I say, this COVID-19 pandemic have stopped a lot of different ways of teaching, because I love teaching in person, but it also opened up a lot of different ways of doing Poetry Inside Out that I had never thought about doing. I mean, we could have done the celebration in person, like we go over to her classroom, she come over to my classroom, but the fact that we did it and did a presentation that we could keep forever, that was a really, really like eye-opening for me. And also another great thing is, I always want parents' participation, and I do get that because the student go back to their family and talk about, oh, it was so wonderful to translate a poem in Japanese. I wanted to learn Japanese and or translate a poem in Spanish, my native language, or translate a poem in Chinese, because I teach a lot of diverse students in my school from South Philadelphia. They really, really empower them, seeing themselves like on the page. But this past spring, two of my parents, they actually got really involved. They looked it up in the internet. They sat next to their child to translate the poem for them. So I understand that this is a new format for a lot of you if you had to do all this like virtually, but there are ways, and I would love to talk to anybody who would could sort of put our brains together and come up with new ideas of how to teach Poetry Inside Out. So any questions for now? I guess I'll give it back
Yes,
to you.
I have a question. I have two questions. One is, when you said you uploaded the poems, so did you upload them and share them as Google Docs individually with the students so they could edit them, or the phrase by phrase and such?
Yeah, I did it with Google Docs because my student was familiar with Google Docs. Of course, you have that obstacle, right? Because in the beginning of the year, I took forever to teach them how to use Google Docs. These are fourth grader. But my partner teacher, she did it in Google Slide.
Okay.
And I understand there's other platform that you could use. So,
and my other question is, did you do it? How did you meet with them? Was it small groups, one at a time? Did you do whole class? I'm just trying to figure out logistics.
Yeah, I posted on my Google Classroom first and keep reminding them that this is your homework or classwork, and it was very difficult. I'm not gonna lie, it was very difficult because everything is new for them and for me. So they're like, how to do it, the procedure, how to do it. We kind of build it one by one. But this year, when I go back, I think I have a better idea how I'm going to do it. I'm going to post it up in Google Classroom. I kind of do like screenshots of the poem, and then sort of now like put it into my Google Slide. There's so many ways of doing it. I would love to share it in more detail with anybody who's interested in it. And I think Mark had some of our lessons online that he could also share with you guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll also chime in and just say quickly, I've mentioned this earlier, that we are holding monthly teacher meetings, so gatherings, if you will, virtually Zoom meetings. And we've been addressing these sort of strategies, sharing resources, and usually they're thematic. So, for example, different ways of bringing this online, best practices, things of that nature. You will all be informed. We're in the midst of finalizing the next month's meeting, the date for that, and I'll let everybody know when that is. I encourage you all to attend. Because we'll be continuing learning process, but at the same time, we'll also be sharing strategies. So in some ways, I see it as relevant not only to PO, but also just to teaching in this distance learning environment as well. and I see that obviously coming through chat, there's a lot of stuff that people have to share, which is wonderful. And I want to point out Arzu's edition, which both those platforms are wonderful. Does anybody else have any questions?
I just want to make a comment about the smart technology because I'm learning that also myself. So that would be great to start like coming up with more lesson on that. But because that way when it become in person, you could have the student touch the screen and do it interactively in a different way. So that was, thank you whoever mentioned that, because I'm also learning how to use that, because there are a lot of games I could use to incorporate into your lesson. And there's like Jamboard, there are Pear Deck, there are like Quizzo, all these other ways that you could involve the kids with using poetry inside out. So I think teachers are so creative; they're going to find ways of doing this. But I'm here to really to support anybody and pick each other's brains about new ways of teaching it.
I just wanted to add that, I put there that Mural or Miro are great. Like people are using these as collaborative tools. I use this at the college level, and it may be different. I think it'll definitely be different at the classroom level. But just, in the way that the poetry packets are designed, there's two very distinct phases, right? There's the phrase by phrase. And then there's the make it flow and Mark, you and Susan, you've been talking about, do you have groups of 4? Do you have pairs? Do you have groups of 3? Do kids work on this on their own? How much do they collaborate with each other? And I think that the opportunity to see an entire classroom on Mural is great, because it's like one big board, and then you can create spaces for different students or different groups, and they can see each other's stuff and move around, and they can have their own space as well. And that's an advantage, I think. And it also is an advantage because you as the teacher can give kind of one framework for the phrase by phrase and give another framework for the make it flow. And and students can then see those two things separately. So if anybody wants to hear more about that, or just how I'm using it, I'm happy to share. But some of you, I think, are already familiar with this.
Wonderful. Thank you,
That
Arzu.
sounds really exciting to me. One of the most empowering aspects of this I found is when the different groups would share out and explain and defend their translations, their interpretations, how their thinking processes, and that would kind of drive a whole classroom discussion. So any way we can virtually to include the whole class, then they start cross-pollinating, and I find that was just so helpful. And oftentimes they want to go back and revise their translations from what they'd learned in another group. So it becomes really, really collaborative. And I think with a lot of virtual learning, that's one of the things we're at risk of losing, is that collaborative, constructive classroom.
Agreed. So I'll just reiterate. I'll invite everybody to the next group meeting, and we can readdress this. And if any other questions come up, or if we want to touch on this again before we conclude today, let's do so. So Lacey, does that answer some of your question? I know it was very, very brief and a quick flyby, but.
It's helpful to just hear, and Mural sounds interesting. I teach 11th grade. I'll have one section of 9th, but that I'm going to check that out. Sounds really helpful. So yes, Lisa, thank you. And I know it's sort of this journey we're all on. No one has the complete answer of what this is going to look like, but it's helpful to just hear the conversation. Thanks.
Wonderful. So I'm going to share my screen, and today what I'd like to do is we're going to dig into the All Mysterious Teacher's Toolbox. I'm going to run through sort of its contents and its uses, and then conclude by sharing some examples of student work, and then we'll of course open it up to questions at that point. And also too, if anybody has any questions or any observations, thoughts, ideas during any part of this process, please feel free to chime in, either obviously via chat or on screen. So. So what I'm going to do today, you will all get an email in addition to the packet of information that's going to be going out. You'll all also be invited to what is called the Teacher's Toolbox, which is what you see in front of your screen, which you see in front of you right now. In this are all of the materials, the curriculum. It's temporarily stored here. I think I said it earlier, by the end of this year, so in December, this will all migrate to the center's website. There'll be a teacher login. And the reason we're doing that is it's basically going to make we'll not only be able to sort of add additional information and additional resources, but we're also going to be able to make this a little bit more seamless when it comes to accessing, let's say, the audio as a poem page, and then background information as well as resources. It's going to be all sort of tied together. But for now, it kind of resides here. So when you open the Teacher's Toolbox, what you're going to see is you'll see obviously these 6 folders. There's the audio folder, the PO translation kits, your poem pages, reading materials, resources, and video. So I'm going to start. With our audio. I'd said before that all of the poem pages, obviously we recommend students listening to them, hearing the poems in their original language. For those poems that that probably are not going to have native speakers in a classroom or in a group, we've started with those. We've started with the audio of those. So this is going to be something that's going to we're continuing to add to. So right now we have Italian, Japanese, Russian, Thai, and Turkish. So we know we did Nazim Hikmet earlier. We have the Russian poems. So when I get into the poem page catalog, you'll see there's a column that's listed that will identify if a poem has an audio file to it. If it does, this is where you find it. So what you would basically do, all you do is you go to that. And this is one of my favorite poems.
Partiamo di notte. Partiamo di notte, dimenticando che siamo ciechi, per raggiungere un territorio nudo del quale ha bisogno la nostra voce. Andiamo al mare per parlare e lanciare sassi contro vento.
And this, along with any of the other materials that are contained in the Teacher's Toolbox, are all downloadable. And they will be when they're migrated as well. So then, of course, we have our Japanese.
古池や買わず飛び込む水の音.
And then Russian and Thai and Turkish. So moving next to the translation kit. This is new, and I've sort of developed this, what's contained here. I'm going to be updating this. Basically what I've done is made smaller sections of concluding poems, starter poems, and transitional poems. And I'll get into what those mean in a second. But essentially what you can do, the idea behind this is you're going to be able to distribute these poems for independent work, and or truncated units, and basically what it contains. And then you'll find this also, and this is basically a translator's guide. So this is actually something I would also recommend distributing to students so they can use at home with on their own, with siblings, relatives. And basically what it is the instructions, obviously, for translating poems using translation circles, which is the process or the procedure we used earlier, and then translation tips. But all of these are structured basically for individual use. So you don't have to retype or distribute the whole teacher's guide. And then before we get into these, what I would like to do is dive into the poem pages. So this is kind of the all-important folder within all of this. So in here, we have all of our poem pages. So we currently have 76 poem pages, representing about 30 different languages. So obviously here is Nazim, who we translated earlier. We have 2 poems by him. Now, of course, this is obviously a lot of information, a lot of different languages, and a lot of different poems. So in order to sort of help make sense of this, we have here what we call the poem page catalog. And the poem page catalog lists all, oops, sorry, my apologies. Can everybody see that? So the poem page catalog lists all of the poems that are currently in the folder. They are listed, we'll see we have last name, the first name of the poet, the gender of the poet, the title, the language that the poem was written in, form of the poem itself, devices, themes, and then levels. So the reason we have it listed this way is so you can go through and obviously sort out what you're looking for. So for example, if you are wanting to do a unit on, let's say, revolution and resistance, or one on immigration, you can find the poems that address those themes here. And then of course, devices as well. So if you're interested in doing a poetry unit, or you're wanting, let's say, wanting a poems in Spanish that have to do with immigration or identity, or let's say nature. We have a large collection of poems of those that meet those requirements. So you can sort by those and then pull out those poems that meet those needs to correspond with whatever unit or whatever reason you're going to be doing those translations. Now, one of the questions that I'm always asked is, what is a good poem to start with? And that's why we have these levels. So when you start, the best, and I should say the most important thing is, obviously, I recommend starting with a poem that no one in the class speaks, or should you take that back? Nobody in the class speaks a language that no one speaks. It basically gets you to focus on, and gets them to focus on, the mechanics of the process and comfortable with the translation process and all of that. I also recommend starting with what we consider to be starter poems. And if you're interested in what makes a starter poem, a concluding poem, or a transitional poem, we have the rubric that we use to determine which one of those poems, which one of those it fits in. So as you can see here, starter poems they're generally a language that no one in the classroom speaks. They're short, they're full of meaning and ambiguity, and they prompt discussion. And then these are examples of what that might be. And then transitional poems and concluding poems. So we have starters here, we have concluding, and these are this spreadsheet can obviously be downloaded and then sorted, and then transitional poems. When constructing a unit or moving from starter to transitional and into concluding, there's not necessarily a set kind of recipe, for which I would say there's not a sort of set process for that. Typically what I recommend is starting again with something short. The Basho haiku that I recommended is a good one, as well as Masahiri and some others. But you're going to get a feel for the comfort level of your students. Typically what I'll do is pick one starter poem and then kind of have two in my back pocket. If the first goes well and it seems like they're getting the handle for it, you might want to go with another. If necessary, then you have that third. If not, and you feel like you'd like to move on, then you can move on to a traditional poem. But a typical unit will basically be made of one starter poem. You have those two that I'd mentioned sort of in your back pocket, maybe 3 to 4 transitional poems, and then obviously as many, 1 to 2 concluding poems. Mm-hmm. I will say that obviously if you are going to do, let's say, a unit on identity and you have 6 poems or 4 poems, however many you have that you are interested in doing, put enough in there that you are willing to get rid of or sacrifice at least 2. And the reason I say that is you want to, again, you don't want to get yourself halfway through the process and through the lesson and then realize that, I have to get through all 6 of these, so I'm going to keep things moving. We have to actually, we're going to have to get through this phrase by phrase today. And you don't want to find yourself in that position. So you want to create enough that you have stuff you can sort of like things to play with, poems to go off on if you feel like that's something, if you wanted to sort of, go to a different, stick around with 1 or 2 more starter poems. But you definitely do not want to find yourself in a situation where you're rushing. So like I said, pad it with, be willing to get rid of at least 2 to 3 poems that you're going to be, that you put into your unit. So any questions on that? And as always, as we go forward and as you begin to take a look at this, 2 things. 1, I'm always available. If there are questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to jump on a Zoom call with anybody. And then, of course, like I said, we have those teachers meetings that I had mentioned earlier.
And Mark, if I can add, in San Diego, I'm happy to host translation parties. And actually, I'll send out a few emails to people, Lacey and Judy, and people that you might think about, or people at your site, and just come over here and we can just kind of spread out in the garden and translate.
And then, of course, for those in Philadelphia, Lisa is there, as well as Erica Darkin, and then I'm here in the Bay Area. So you have a community of people who are active, obviously active resources. So those are your poem pages. For those, so let's see, and then in our resources folder, we have the teacher's guide, which you all currently have, a unit organizer, a PO intro unit, and then the translator's guide. So again, the translator's guide is constructed for distribution to students for home use. It's tailored to those students so they can have a reference material. They have reference material at home if they're working on things independently, or if they have questions about the process. It's something that they can have at home to refer to. The organizing a unit, yesterday I kind of ran through guiding questions and how to sort of put together a unit. I put this together because I think this is sort of, it's a beneficial sort of like thinking tool. So a lot of the points that I laid out yesterday, for example, like asking questions like what language resources do my students bring to the classroom? What language resources do they have available to them? Are all laid out here. So the idea being behind this is that as you sort of start to begin to think about, okay, I would like to implement this. This is sort of a great way of sketching out an original, sort of a unit, if you will. So again, it takes you through this idea of assessing your existing resources and then moving on to picking the focus of the unit. So what kind of unit makes sense for your classroom? There are certain themes or languages you'd like to cover, and then considering the focus of your unit and your classroom population, what poems serve that purpose best. So thinking about a good starter poem and then what poems should follow. This is also nice too, because it not only makes your sort of thinking put your thinking out there in front of you. But you can, I've had people share this with me and with other teachers, sort of say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Here's what I've sort of got so far. What do you think? So, and if you are interested in sort of taking this for a spin and and want to just start with a quick unit, I've developed this, and this is a 45-minute session on Basho. So obviously it lays out notes for teaching, but basically it is also a great introduction for students, as for you, to poetry inside out, and just then the process of translation within this context. I will be adding extra kind of lesson packets that build upon this. This is an intro poem. I'll be adding concluding as well as transitional poems to this. So obviously, if this is something you want to use, there will be ones that kind of follow up and build upon Basho's work. I'm also in the process of editing this. Right now, this is constructed. It can be implemented in a distance learning environment, but I'm in the process of editing this to provide resources so you can actually distribute it and implement it within a distance learning environment.
Mark, I have a question.
Yep.
I should have asked it earlier. Yes, Ariel, Philly represent. I'm sorry, I have to say that as well. She said it in the chat, I'm sorry. So I'm wondering if the poems, are there any other poems of Black and brown folks of the African diaspora? I have a lot of Black students in my class, and I see people of color. I don't know, I haven't looked through all the stats, but I'm imagining maybe Spanish or French, or are there any other languages there that we could explore?
So that's a great question. So we do, and some of them are some of my favorites. So we have here, to begin with, Émile Césaire. So this is actually a fragment of a larger poem that was written about the Negritude movement that was developed by French-speaking Black intellectuals, writers, and basically asks his question about, what is my Blackness? So we have Émile Césaire, we have Lima, who writes in Portuguese, and a couple others. But you'll find them all listed within the Poem Page catalog as well. This is a beautiful poem.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I said this yesterday, but if there are poems, artists, things you do not see represented, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I can make sure that those make it into the catalog as well. A lot of the poems you see here, some of them we curated and we picked ourselves. But there are a large number that came from not only teachers, but also students as well. Hajari is one of them. You can come up. And Hutin. This was actually brought forth by a student in Worcester, Massachusetts. His grandmother had actually recommended it to him, to us via him. And so.
And I had a student whose mother was from Martinique, and she had recommended Aimé Césaire. And I thought it was remarkable. Not only was he telling his mom what we were doing in school, but that she started talking about the poets from her culture. And it was actually that poem, not the one that Mark showed you, but a different one that really kind of cracked open the whole classroom, and they figured out how to read allegorically on their own. It was really quite remarkable. And it was about the French colonialists.
I have a related question, which is, so I'm a literary translator, and I'm working with a poet who writes in Nahuatl and self-translates into Spanish. And I would love to help design a poem that was a Nahuatl original. So would I just contact you via email, Mark, or
Yeah.
is there an opportunity for us to do content creation?
That there's absolutely an opportunity. I would love that. I'll email you later this afternoon, and we can set up a time to chat. We do have
awesome, thanks.
And we do actually, just to point it out, we do have one. Where are you? This is not Nahuatl. Is this the one? No, that's Totzel. Anyway, yes, that would be wonderful. And we actually, here we go.
Oh, that's so cool from Totzel.
Yeah. I apologize. My internet connection is. So we do have some. Those are the only two poems that we have that represent native Mexican language. So I'm always looking for more stuff. So like I said before, if you're going through this and you're like, wow, there is no Arabic, or wow, like, you know, my students speak a particular language and it's not represented here. I really wish I had fill in the blank. Yeah, just let me know and I'd be more than happy to work with you to develop content. You know, I really see this as being sort of an organic process. And one that you know, I'm always more than happy to work on people with. I think it just enriches the process. So.
Do you know offhand if there are any poems that deal with anti-racism or some type of brutality or discrimination, that type of thing that would go with what's going on, to, you know?
Well, in the current catalog, we don't have anything that deals directly with that, but we do have a large number of poems that deal with identity and the power of cultural and linguistic identity. Césaire is obviously one of them. We do, and then Daisy Zamora is another. So we do have, there are a number, and if you go into the catalog, those poems that are listed, I apologize, my internet connection is like super slow today for some reason, as am I, so.
Other Aimé Césaire would be a good one, I think, because I think it captures a lot of the anger at being oppressed.
Well, and that poem too is obvious, that what we have the poem page of is a fragment of a larger poem. And there are pieces of that poem that we clearly do not have in the catalog right now that build upon that sort of sense of like identity and beauty within his own identity and anti-colonialism that we can pull out.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of that other one, the ones that my students did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a part, that wasn't a part of this poem, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So, but to get back to your original question, so the poems that are listed under themes as being part of identity or revolution and resistance, but more so identity, are going to be those poems that are going to speak to what your the question that you asked.
Okay, thank you.
And Karen, I don't know if you saw what I wrote in the chat, but I was in this dope PD the other day with this woman named Dr. Goldie Muhammad, and lots of people had questions about how to teach texts that they're anticipating that are heavy around anti-oppression. And, you know, I know you're thinking of that text, what is it, Jason Reynolds and Ibram for kids, right? And so I had this question for her too, and she was like, how to use layered short text, visual poems, other things that can highlight humanity and joy and happiness of people of color, because so much layering with the text like that might make kids feel like shit, for lack of better words, right now.
Right.
So I'm sure there are poems here that talk about people of color being happy or celebrating their humanity in some way.
Right. Thank you.
No problem.
You're welcome. So let's go to video. This is a smaller folder that is new, that I've been adding more stuff to. So in here, what you're going to find, currently we have obviously the What is PO video, which is what you've we kind of kicked all this off with. And then this is a video. I don't know if you are familiar, if anybody's familiar with the City of Asylum in Pittsburgh. But this is a video about the City Asylum, more specifically about one of the poets and a poem that we have in the poem page catalog. So the reason the video basically exists is it serves as a sort of a parking place for audio and visual pieces that can be used as compendium to specific poems. So for example, this video corresponds with Du Chang, which is with this poem. So in the video, he is talking about his experience in solitary confinement, as well as how he writes poetry and his experience in China, as well as his wife's experience. So again, this might be something that you would want to show to students or review yourself before doing this translation. And as more, and like I said, I'm in the process of curating some other stuff that will be up here as we go forward. And then last but not least are reading materials. So we have a newsletter that goes out every month, and it serves as a purpose to announce upcoming meetings, as well as curriculum that's being released, new poem pages, things like that. So if there's anything obviously that you would like to broadcast to the larger community, I recommend letting me know and I can put it in there. One of the other things that we had done last year that I'm going to be basically starting again next month is I've sort of added additional reading materials to those newsletters in case anybody was interested in digging a little deeper into sort of the mechanics of what makes PO tick, or things that that kind of speak to not only Poetry Inside Out but teaching in general. So for example, when we did the Angel Island poems, we had this this essay on the poems themselves, as well as the kind of construction of them, the history of the poems themselves. We have a paper on exploratory talk for learning. Rethinking classroom participation, and then one on cultivating constructive conversations. So again, like I had said, as they go out with the newsletter, they get them placed in here. So this will be a kind of a constantly developing library, or developing library. And if there's anything that you feel like that would be beneficial that you'd like to share, let me know, and they will appear on the newsletter and in here. So, any questions? All righty. So before we conclude, I wanted to share two things. Susan and I were chatting yesterday, and I wanted to share a couple of examples of student work and then turn it over to Susan. These were both translations of a Nieto, or excuse me, Espino poem that Susan's students had done. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Oh, that looks great.
All right. So Susan, did you want to chat about that?
Yeah, this goes back to 2012 when PIO sent Marty Rutherford, who had a Spencer Foundation grant, to do research in my classroom. So I went through a short little training up at UCSD through a writing project. And then at the time I had 2 classes of gifted 6th graders and then a regular class of 7th graders who were almost all below grade level. And I thought, if this is as wonderful as Marty says it was, I want to see how it works with these underperforming kids rather than just do it as like an enrichment thing for the gifted kids. And this was the project that really changed that whole classroom, changed the dynamics of it, raised their test scores over 2.5 grade levels on 2 tests on average. And I have all that data. And we had 2 ethnographers coming and just recording the conversations with the kids in their quartets and then interviewing them. And then I just continued it for the rest of the year, where the kids started writing their own poems. I taught them how to do self-portraits. They made their own poetry pages. It was really a wonderful thing. But after we we did maybe 6 poems, and pretty much in the sequence Mark suggested, I wanted to push it a little bit and make it more academic, because I saw that their conversations were coming into this really advanced level. They were really collaborating really well. Kids who never said anything were talking and explaining how, for example, word order works in Spanish versus English. They were identifying articles. So they were teaching themselves grammar. They discovered what allusions were in poetry. They were talking on a very thematic level and very abstractly. So I wanted to bring them into the world of 7th grade standards, and I wanted them writing some little analytical paragraphs and maybe comparing even multiple texts. So I asked them to add a paragraph just explaining their thinking, which came really so naturally after all the discussion, but then they could kind of take ownership of their own translations. And oftentimes, and this may have happened in some of our groups the other day, where you go along with the group, you agree on a translation, but maybe there's some things that you wanted to do differently. So I had a portfolio-based classroom. So then the kids on their laptops would just write out their own translation, maybe even illustrate it, and then add their own interpretive paragraphs. So that's why we had such a variety of differences in the translations and also in the little interpretive paragraphs. So I would ask Judy, if you could read the one on the left on your screen, and I've covered the students' names up. If you could just read the translation and then the little paragraph.
Okay, I'm squinting a little bit here. On the left?
Yeah.
A little bird in the mountains, in the hole of the tree, has made her nest in the morning, and at dawn it will sing from its heart. If the sweet bird pokes out from within to drink the dew and leave, it will have left with music in its heart. And do you want me to read the paragraph?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm really squinting now. Even something small and insignificant can affect your life in a big way. The bird represents something that was small and insignificant. The bird leaving represents the author wanting that thing back, but still having the memories of it. In other words, we don't notice something until it's gone.
And that one, that's one that I selected because I think often they will sort of land on a cliche, they will land on a proverb, it'll still sound familiar, but I interpret that as them not only just making sense of their conversations and their translation process, but connecting it to something familiar. And it was through that that we got to this notion of themes, like they identified this thread of like Carpe Diem poems, or you know, again, you don't know what you've lost till it's gone kind of poems. But that doesn't mean that everybody understood that poem the same way. And then if somebody else wants to read this other one.
What grade level was that one?
7th grade. But all these kids were English learners and they all came into class that year as below basic.
Cool.
Yeah. And I had, I think 8 of the kids had IEPs. All but 2 of them were Spanish speakers. And then 80% of the kids were EL Spanish. I had one student who was German who had come from Judy's school. And she was reading at grade level. I mean, just maybe 25% of them came in the beginning of that year reading at grade level. The rest were basic or even below basic. And this whole project really transformed them. They felt smart. I mean, that's what they told me. They felt smart. And they didn't feel like school was all about guessing what I thought the right answer was. They felt empowered. Somebody want to read the second one?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. The tree's nest. In the cool morning, a bird makes its nest in the bundle of a tree. It's because of that that the tree's heart wakes with warmth inside, as if its heart itself was musical. If the sweet, sweet bird were to poke out its head to drink the dew, to inhale the aroma, the one tree in the Sierra with the one bird of song would go out and sing its heart away. In the poem, the bird represents the joy of a small thing, the joy a small thing may bring you. When that tiny joy nestles in, you never want it to leave. The joy may lift your heart and spirits and make everything seem a little better. After the bird leaves, you always have the fond memory. Even though more happy things will come, some big, some small, and the joy will slowly fade. The song it left in your heart will never be forgotten.
And I could see pairing this with the Turkish poem we did the other day and writing about that theme of somehow finding inner peace in times of extreme torment. That it may not be easy, but at least for some people it is possible. And just knowing that it's possible gives me hope. And just knowing that there is a whole world of poets out there writing about this experience gives me hope. As a human, I mean, they bring their humanity to this. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to talk about, Mark, but I wanted to point out the difference in the translations and how we moved from just doing the translations to nudging it up a little bit academically, because from 7th grade on, there's that writing task of, you know, analytical writing, coming up with a claim or a thesis sentence, supporting it with evidence. And I wanted to scaffold that using the PO work.
Yeah. No, I think this is wonderful. I think, and then obviously analyzing the two, you know, we could spend a whole session going through both, you know, kind of comparing and contrasting the two, having translated it ourselves. But I think the other nice thing is that, you know, this is obviously something that also can be done, you know, again, ideally, but independently, you know, so if students were translating poems independently, and then coming back with something like this, their own interpretation of the poem, and then group sharing, even after having gone through a group translation, it can be an incredibly enriching experience.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions about the teacher's toolbox or any of the materials that are contained within it? Go ahead. Oh, Judy?
Yeah, I just had to unmute. A question came up in our group about, splitting the poems up into smaller chunks in doing this online.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe just doing it if you had a longer poem, a few lines or a stanza. And so we were talking about how we were talking about having to scroll back and forth and flip pages and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And how that could be a little, the students might get disengaged at a certain point or frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking about if you were just doing a few lines or a stanza, somehow chunking the glossary so that, some of those glossaries are long, and maybe just being able to take the words that were specific to that stanza. So that my long way of asking, are the glossary pages editable? Like if I wanted to, because they're in alphabetical order, I don't necessarily want all of those words to show the kids in one chunk of time.
Right.
Are they editable so that I could delete parts that they won't be using in that day? Is that possible?
So I do have, go ahead, yes?
Yes, so that is so like, what grade do you teach again? I'm so sorry, Judy.
I do 3rd, 4th, and 5th mainly.
I totally understand, because when I first taught Poetry Inside Out, there was so many columns for the kid to like navigate. They were so confused, and most of my students understood it, but there was a couple of them who kind of like just copy all the definition. I mean, yeah, I have one person who did, like one group of people that did that. So what we came up with to do inquiry is to sort of cut off the middle column, but just have the synonyms. So directly looking at the for younger kids. Older kids, I think maybe that's not necessary. For the younger kids, they just look at the foreign language and the English word, and then just chose like giving them like 2 choices, 3 choices to navigate, to talk about, the definitions. I think that was more productive than have them to read the whole thing and get really, really confused. So that was one modification that we did to just test it out to see how it would work. And it worked pretty well, but I didn't have to do that for all of them, but maybe just the first poem that you do with them, and then on to just let them look at the whole original text. So what we do, instead of 1, 2, 3 columns, we kind of cover the middle one, or just like Xerox it somehow. So just matching the foreign language and the English together for the first few lesson that we did. So that helped.
Yeah.
And Judy, to get to your question, go ahead, Lisa.
Can I show them what I did with my students? Like having them toggle between 2, the glossary, and then another document that is like a Word document where they could type it on it.
Yeah.
Can I show them?
Sure. Sure. Go right ahead.
Can I do that?
Yes, Judy. I'll to answer your question. I do have editable versions of all of these poems. So if there's a specific poem that you're interested in either eliminating a column on or tailoring to meet your needs, and this goes for everybody, just let me know, and I can make those available to you, or if you're or I can edit it for you if that's easier as well. But yes, that is possible, and it can be done.
That would be great. And I do work with mostly, I have a lot of kids with IEPs, or they're being assessed for IEPs and they're really struggling. And a lot of it is just, they need a lot of white space on the page, and that kind of thing. So that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Two cautions, if I could, though. I think with that, you run the risk of the students thinking that the words that you're offering up have to be the right ones. And what happens is, I believe in the cognitive process, when they go from part to whole to part to whole, when they go from bottom up to top down, as they work their way through the poem, they're constructing theories of what the poem is about. And oftentimes that has them go back and revise a word choice. So if those choices aren't there anymore because we shrunk it so much, then I think that would be really frustrating. And I want to make sure that they have that, that latitude.
My thought is presenting the whole poem, going over the whole poem, hearing it, reading it. But when it comes time to do the actual phrase by phrase, that's when they really struggle with just all the print.
Okay. Got it.
I was thinking too, just with what Susan was saying, for the younger guys, if you're only going to kind of like cut it down at first, this might also be a really cool way to teach them how to use like thesaurus.com, right? So if they read through that poem and they just feel like the couple of options that maybe they were given for synonyms don't quite go together, that could even be like a building on that lesson, right? Like, okay, so like we know that most words don't just have 2 or 3 synonyms. Where can we look for more? And so that could be something too, where you don't give them all that print at once, but then maybe when they're going into like they're revising and making it flow, then maybe you could add on that thesaurus component for them so they still get to make a lot of choices. But because they're, you know, a little bit younger, they're not as overwhelmed by all of the print.
Right. But that supports, I think, the authority and the cognitive linguistic processes of choosing the just right word.
Yeah.
That very poetic sense of choosing the just right word, which I saw my students struggling with and being really proud of when they felt like they landed it. Because they always saw this as a puzzle to be solved. And then when they come up with their final translation, there's a sense like it fits, it works, and they owned it. And that's just, I think for a lot of people, this was like the first really aesthetic linguistic activity they had done for a lot of students who just had not been successful in school. And that momentum really built.
Yeah, that's why also I was thinking, rather than taking out the column, just still having the 3 columns, but doing only the words that were for one stanza or those lines at a time.
I get that, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to dominate that.
No, good question.
Share my screen, just like, this is not the perfect solution, but that's the solution that some of us came up with. It could be adjusted. Let's see, give me a second. So what we did is I put this just one page for face by face. I didn't need to, with some instruction on the top. And then kids will have to copy and download this. And this is not the first poem they did. This is like the 4th or 3rd poem they did. So they're pretty familiar with the procedures. Basically, I put them very organized, like in lines. And also, so this is the original poem, and this is the space that where a student had to start typing in their translation. So they could type in their name and translation on that. So, but they had to toggle between 2 screens. So this is actually a slide that I made, but what they did was, this is not easy. I did a better one than this, but I couldn't find the other one. But what they had to do is sort of have side by side. I know there's a lot of stuff on my screen right now, but actually this is what my student taught me to do. So they could go to the poem and enlarge it, and they could go to the glossary and pick the word and start typing it. I found it easier if you have two
That
people
works.
do this together, rather than have one person. Like one person could say, oh, let me look at the glossary. Let me look at the word. This word, do you choose grateful or appreciative? And they could talk about that, have that discussion before another person could type in the translation.
I think that's brilliant, Lisa.
So it forced them to talk to each other if they had to work together. But it is a lot to handle because with virtual learning, there's so many screens, there's so many little pieces. So you may have to do this collaboratively, like as a whole group first, and then like eventually sort of like gradually release, let them like do them on their own. But I also find it is much easier if you do it in small group. I have done this in small group and it just goes beautifully. But of course, you know,
Well, and I can see if you have one student being the recorder, you know, doing the typing, and the students in that group are you know, are collaborating on what they think would be the way to write it, and then you just have one person typing it.
Yeah. So they could also do it by themselves, but it's a lot of tag on between this screen, that screen, this screen, and that's why I think two of my parents, they were helping their child doing that. It was wonderful to have them do, help them navigate.
I think that's lovely. Would you share that?
Yeah, I think I have put it somewhere with Mark has it. I will share it, but I don't think I could share it for some reason. Attach it to the Zoom. Can you allow it, Mark, that I could just attach these to the?
I have this in the folder from our last meeting, and I can share it. I can share it out.
And this is actually a presentation that we did with the sharing with my partner teachers. So the student did the presentation. They read the poem and they share their translation. Let me maybe make this a little bit bigger. It's hard to see, I know. So Cody did this. Don't worry about the name. I just had first name anyway. So and then Travis did that. And Yusini is a English learner, so he was only able to do 4 lines, but he was doing such a good job with it. I was really impressed. And then we did all of it together with the Flow by Flow. Basically, we have 3 people who were the leader, and then after we have done one version of it, we went over as a whole class to make one big one poem as a flow by flow, make it flow version. Then we did a little research about Monkey Bridge and show some video to the other class, things that we learned. So, yeah. So I wanted to share that real quick, just to give you an idea how it could be possible online, even though it's a lot of work and a lot of mistake being made too, but it's worth it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa.
That was super cool. And I was thinking about for the younger kids too, if you wanted to adjust what they were seeing, you could pull out yourself, and on the same screen they could break up how they're doing their translation. So one text box in the slideshow would be them typing in their translation, and then on the other side of that same slideshow would be them the words that they would need to choose from, and their translations would probably end up being on a couple of different slides that they'd have to kind of put together at the end. But that's another way you could maybe do it independent, where they wouldn't have to toggle between 2 screens if you're going to make that slideshow anyway.
Definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. So
I just had an idea.
Oh no, go ahead, Lisa.
I just had an idea. If anyone was interested this year in having students do the same poem, like one of these elementary classrooms in Philadelphia. I do 11th grade English, and then we could do some sort of sharing. It could be synchronous or asynchronous, recording our student poems. I think that could be really amazing. If anyone was interested in that, you can shoot me your email, but I think my students would be really into that collaboration. And this format does allow it. So if anyone's interested in that, just let me know.
Lizzie, I think that's a great idea. Would you mind, Lacey, is it okay if you share your email address in the chat? And that, one of the other things too that now that you bring that up, you know, in addition to everybody that obviously that's in this meeting right now, we have you know, collections of you know, other collections of teachers across the country. In addition to there's one, Luke was not able to join us. He's in Japan, and we have a collection of teachers that are also in Jerusalem. So yeah, I think this idea of sort of poetry collaboration across you know, across countries could be done very well. But yeah, thanks, Lacey. So Karen asked, does anybody else teach 6th grade or middle school?
I did, but I'm not teaching anymore.
Okay.
I teach middle school. I teach 7th and 8th grade.
Okay.
I know a two 6th grade teacher from Chicago that are starting to do poetry out. So anybody's interested.
Yes, I am. I was trying to see who I could link up with to, you know, to share, you know, some ideas, collaborate, that kind of thing.
I think these guys would be very open to it.
Yeah. And so, you know, again, I'll come back to I really encourage everybody that's, you know, that's interested to attend, you know, August's teacher meeting, because, you know, these conversations can continue and we can actually set up some stuff like this, as well as continue to share resources, and do some collaborating there as well. I also, of course, have everybody's email address. So if there's anybody directly opposed to not having their email address shared, I can remove you from that list, and I'm more than happy to share that with everybody. So just that, so we can, you know, all stay in touch, if that's okay with everybody.
Yes.
Okay. I'll make sure that that spreadsheet then goes out with the rest of the packet, so we can all kind of follow up with each other. Sound good? Alrighty. Well, I think we're going to close a couple minutes early today, if that's okay with everybody. If there's any other questions.
Did you want to do that analysis chart thing?
Let me pull that up really quickly. Yes. So Susan, I want to screen here.
Well, Mark is finding that. So in the years after, I really wanted to push some of the more academic writing. And because I liked the PO protocol, the working in teams and quartets, which we called, we used a chart like this to access more discussion and more writing. And then a little bit later, I saw a very similar one that this classical music station I listened to had for how to listen to music. I don't know if that comes out backwards or forwards on your screen. But this I thought was just kind of an easier tool for writing about poetry. So you could see, for example, in Basho's haiku, we hear the onomatopoeia of a plop when the frog jumps in the water. This connotes the idea of blah, blah, blah. So it helps support some kind of structured thinking process if you're going to write a summary, if you're going to write an analysis, if you're going to write like a précis, depending on your grade level. So I think we're going to work on this and clean it up a little bit, but this was just kind of a simplified idea for helping students, supporting students to write more clearly and more academically. And what happened with one 6th grade class is we started out the year doing poetry translation. Then we moved into reading short narratives, fiction, and then nonfiction. They did collaborative nonfiction. And then I asked what novel they wanted to read together. For some reason, they all wanted to read Life of Pi, which I just thought was, oh my gosh. But they wrote in pairs. And what they did was they ended up writing a compendium per chapter. There are 100 chapters in Life of Pi, but they used a very similar chart to be able to write academically, to explain what the writer was doing, what was happening in the story, the use of the British language, the use of all the imagery and abstract ideas that, that were going on in that book. So this just helps support having those classroom conversations. So we will clean this up and send it in some form.
Yeah, I'll make sure it goes out with the rest of the information. Cool. Thanks, Susan.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, I am going to I'm going to bid you all adieu. My email address is in. You should all have it. If you don't, it is in the back of the teacher's toolbox, or excuse me, not the teacher's guide. And I will put it right here as well. But like I said, it's also contained in the back of the teacher's guide. I'm always available. Please shoot me an email if you have any questions, concerns. If you would like me to kind of chime in and jump into a class, to a class with you, I'm more than happy to do that. Schedule a Zoom call, anything. So I'm always available. And I just really also too want to thank everybody, really for taking the time to attend and be part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope to see.
Thank you. It's really lovely.
You're very, very welcome. And I hope to see you all in the next teachers meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Susan, can you put your email in the chat, please?
Absolutely. And I'm happy to support. Anyone and everyone.
Thank you.